talk this evening, and then I'm sure the few other bits and pieces and agendas. If you move to the next slide, Chris, just to look through what's there. So, well, of course, who we are. That's always a very important thing. So myself, I'm Josip. I'm from Squared Up, and I help run engineering at Squared Up. I've got Alicia also from Squared Up, and I've got Chris from Microsoft, who actually between us running this meetup. I'm sure the Alicia and Chris will be, tell you a bit more about themselves in a minutes, in a few minutes time. And then if we move to the next slide, we shall see what we're planning for today. So introductions as we go along, and then Chris has kindly agreed to give us a quick update on Microsoft build, which is going to be exciting. And then we got Matt, a speaker, joining us to talk about automating infrastructure as a code, best practices with ARM and Checkov. And I'm not sure about you, but I'm very, very excited about this talk because there's nothing better for me when things have done for me. So that's really cool. So at the end of this, I think 7:45, we shall aim to wrap this up with a nice Q&A, and then as always, at the end, it's very important part is the wrap up networking, and then we'll talk a bit more about what's coming up. And I'm pretty certain for some of you, particularly the football fans, just as we pass the 8 o'clock, the sort of multiple screens will come very handy. So without further ado, I'm going to let Alicia sort of talk a bit more about the Azure Thames Valley and how you can help us.
Thanks, Josip. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Azure Thames Valley Meetup. My name is Alicia Dillon, and I'm the Community Marketing Executive at Squared Up. And as Josip mentioned earlier, one of the organizers for Azure Thames Valley Meetup Group. We are looking forward to getting some more awesome talks lined up for you throughout the rest of the year. So if you are willing to present something to the community, or if you happen to know someone who would be, then please go ahead and submit your session via our Sessionize page. We also really want to continue to grow our community. So if you know any Thames Valley locals who would be interested in joining our group, then please go ahead and share our website and all of our social media channels. If you also know any local businesses who may want to support us, then please point them in our direction. We'd love to have a chat with them. I will go ahead and share all of the links to our Sessionize page, social media platforms in the Teams chat. And I will now hand over to Chris, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you.
Well, before that, though, we've got one more thing beforehand. So the reverse of an Apple event. So we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft Build, because Microsoft Build was, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago now? Time is kind of going faster than ever once again here. Slow, but somehow rocket fast pace. So we'll go ahead and just take a few minutes to talk about Microsoft Build. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead, bring over my web browser here. So Microsoft Build, as I say, happened a few weeks ago, and it's one of Microsoft's usual annual events in the calendar. So you'll hear about Microsoft Build, you'll hear about Microsoft Ignite. I think there was a bit of a change this year where we had an earlier Ignite as well in the calendar year. But Build is always really that developer-focused event. So I'm not going to go through all of the kind of Microsoft pages here on it. Instead, what I'm going to do, I wrote a bit of a blog post on this and covered some of the main themes, some of the main areas that were covered as part of the conference, some of the main announcements, and I find this a bit of a cohesive summary here. There are some other resources out there. Folks have done things like their video logs about it. There's the Book of News, for example, as well. But all of them seem to have kind of disparate pieces of information where I've tried to bring all of it together in one page. So I'll drop that in the chat for everyone here as well, and you can have a scroll through as we're talking. So overall, Build's focused on a few particular areas here. We'll just zoom in on this section here. There were 6 or 7 themes here that they were focusing in on this year. So developer velocity, which is very relevant to tonight's talk, for example, delivering new intelligent cloud-native apps by harnessing power of data and AI, cloud-native apps and being able to run them anywhere, building the next generation of collaborative apps for hybrid work, differentiated SaaS apps, and then building digital twins, mixed reality, and metaverse apps. So you can see a lot of different themes coming together in those different pillars there. So, for example, the DevOps angle with developer velocity, data and AI under that data and AI pillar, building cloud native apps, being able to run them anywhere. I will come back to because I find that one particularly exciting. Next generation of collaborative apps. So think about things like the Microsoft Graph, Teams, and all of those other Microsoft technologies you can hook into to really make some intelligent applications that can go beyond just cloud and start thinking about those hybrid scenarios. And that's also the same for differentiated SaaS apps as well. And then, of course, that next generation of applications. So being able to bring that digital reality with that physical reality, bring them together into these new forms of applications. So first off, the one just to focus in on here, the one I mentioned I'm most excited about is this building cloud native applications that run anywhere. So think about the scenario where you've deployed your applications using things like Azure App Service, using things like Logic Apps, Event Grid, Azure Functions, maybe API management. You've always had to go ahead really and host those in Azure. Some of those technologies have allowed containerization to go and easily deploy them in other platforms, but it hasn't really been a consistent story until now. So you may have heard of something called Azure Arc. Azure Arc is this strategy, this framework, and this set of technologies to make it a lot easier to go and manage your workloads, whether it's on premises, whether it's in Azure, whether it's in another cloud, for example. Azure Arc is really this management layer to go ahead, whether it's virtual machines, whether it's databases, or whether it's container platforms, to go ahead and easily manage those across those different platforms there. So the beauty of this is this story is all starting to come together because you've got things like Azure Functions, Logic Apps, Event Grid, API management, and app services, which all act as extensions into Azure Arc. So what that means is any Kubernetes cluster that you can go ahead and enable Azure Arc on, you can go ahead and turn on extensions on that particular Azure Arc enabled cluster. And those extensions are things like app services, things like Event Grid, things like API management. So what that then means is it becomes super, super easy for you to be able to go and run app services in these different platforms. So running app services on premises, in AWS, in GCP, in Azure natively. It's a really, really exciting idea because now you can have that same consistent deployment mechanism that you're used to with app services anywhere. You know, you're not just limited to Azure, you can literally have it anywhere. Likewise, you can go and manage those resources just like they are in the Azure portal. So when I go ahead and spin up an app service on an Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster on AWS, on GCP, on premises, it looks just like an app service in the Azure portal because it's exposed as a resource like that in the Azure portal. So when you think about all those things like easy auth, when you think about deployment center, deployment slots, all of those kind of features, you just get those no matter where they're hosted. Now, there are some limitations, of course, where it's in preview right now, but the idea behind that and the power behind that is really, really cool. So that's something I'm definitely excited about from the announcements from Build. Lots of great announcements around Kubernetes. So, for example, Azure RBAC for Kubernetes is now generally available. You've got things like encryption at host support in AKS. You've got FIPS compliant nodes. You've got support for regulated industries. Many announcements around event hubs and premium being available in preview. PowerShell support for durable functions. Lots of pluggable pieces for durable functions as well. So many, many great announcements there, and many sessions to go and support on that as well. From the developer velocity side, lots of great things in terms of thinking about how we can improve the velocity of our developers. Clue is in the name, developer velocity, but not just from the work perspective, but also thinking about the work-life balance side of things as well, making sure that we're as developers, taking care of ourselves and making sure that we're doing the right things to look after ourselves as well. Lots of great updates there as well. For example, Microsoft have released the OpenJDK, the Microsoft build of OpenJDK, I should say. That is now generally available. There are integrations with Azure Security Center and GitHub Actions, for example. Many integrations with Log Analytics, for example. App Service Managed certificates are now generally available. So you can get free SSL certificates for your apps running on App Service. There's many, many exciting announcements there. Differentiated SaaS apps, many things to do with not so much announcements, but lots of sessions around things like using Azure AD B2C, being able to use zero trust models in your applications, and building your own software as a service. And I think that is really the shift that I've started to see over the last few years. From my time working with customers in Microsoft, is seeing a lot more customers thinking about how they go and build their own software as a service rather than individual client applications, starting to build their own services and cloud services there as well. And you're starting to see that focus here in these different pillars, focusing on how you go and use some of these technologies for that. And likewise, in that world of hybrid work, I think one of the great announcements back from Ignite earlier in the year was about Azure Communication Services and the way it can go and integrate with Teams. That was obviously announced back in Ignite, but it was once again talked about in build here. And there's some additional features and functionality that they talk about there as well. But I think when you think about that idea that maybe I, as an end user, I'm speaking with my healthcare provider, my finance organization, whether it's my bank or my whoever it is, I can go ahead and just use their web browser, their web app, to go and speak to the call center, for example, and they go and use Teams or whatever client they're using internally to go and just interact with me as a user. Super, super powerful in terms of that integration. Many, many things going on in the data space that I couldn't do justice in the few minutes we have left here, but lots of great announcements around Azure Cosmos DB. For example, the serverless tier is now generally available, so great for cost savings. On cost savings as well, the free tier has got extra benefits as part of it. So if you want to use the free tier for maybe pet projects or for proof of concepting things out, you can absolutely go and do more with that now as well. Linux emulator is in preview. There's an integrated cache. There's many great things in the AI space with Azure Applied AI services and taking cognitive services into very targeted specific areas. For example, form recognizer was one of those. Text analytics, question answering feature, many different scenarios there that have been announced at build there as well in the data and machine learning space. And then finally, of course, by no means least, thinking about things like the physical and digital twins and mixed reality and metaverse apps. It's such an exciting space. You know, there's so much going on in the industry right now. I could easily fill a whole hour session just talking about all the announcements at Build. But you know, this is by no means the least on my list. It was just unfortunately the one that ended up at the bottom of my list here. But again, many great things. When you think about Microsoft Mesh that got announced back at Ignite earlier this year, the story that now brings together with digital twins, Internet of Things, Azure Maps, Synapse Analytics, and more. There's some really great sessions that took place at Build. And again, I've linked to a few of those here in this blog post as well. So again, by no means is this going to be a very, very thorough session and recap of what happened at Build, but just a little bit, just to tease some of the things that were there as well. So I've posted a link in the chat window. Feel free to drop some questions there in the chat, and I'll respond to those as we get the session going here, all about well, today's session. So with that, let me jump back to our PowerPoint here, and we'll introduce the speaker for the evening. So I am delighted to introduce Matt Johnson, who is a developer advocate here at bidcrew.io, who's going to be talking all about automating infrastructure as code best practices with ARM and Checkov. So I'm sure lots of people here have probably heard about DevOps, DevSecOps, and heard about infrastructure as code along the way, whether it's things like Terraform, whether it's things like ARM, and we've probably been there. We've put an accidental false that needed to be true at one point, and maybe it's, maybe there's something we can do to make those checks a little bit easier for ourselves there. So this is a point where I hand over to the experts. I hand over to Matt to go ahead and talk to us all about Checkoff and how it can help us out here. So Matt, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. And yeah, hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me. I was just saying, I think before everyone joined, it would be awesome if this could be in person versus virtual, but a year and a half on, we are where we are. So happy to be here all the same. And I'm sure, just like a real meetup, I will help myself to a beer after the session regardless. So yeah, let me share my screen and we will get going. He says. There we go. Always a joy to use like 6 different meeting apps, isn't it? And working out where everything is in each one of them. Really should have done a quick dry run on that, but there we go. Give me a sec.
It's okay. What we're doing is we're simulating that time when we're in a normal meetup room where you've got to go ahead, get the right dongle out. Exactly. Pull that out. Exactly. So we're just giving the live, real experience here, folks. That's what we're doing.
Fantastic. Here we go. Right. Let me share screen 2.
There we go.
Can you all see a big blue logo?
Can see the desktop. Yeah.
Wonderful. Is it a terminal or a PowerPoint?
I see Palo Alto Bridge Crew at the moment.
Wonderful. That's all right, because Mac is currently popping up 1,000 different things saying, oh, you need to give this app permission to view the desktop. So I wanted to make sure that that was already the case, and Mac is just lying to me. Wonderful. Yes. Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. My name is Matt Johnson. I'm a developer advocate at Bridge Crew, and I love to keep this super like meetup style. And so if you do have questions, we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. But if you do want to add something directly into the chat, and I'm sure Chris or one of the hosts will kind of interrupt me if there's something we can kind of delve off on a tangent and talk about. I always find that's kind of fun versus leaving everything till the end. If you want to find me on Twitter afterwards, I'm at MetaHertz, and we have a Slack, and I know that it's kind of annoying having a million different Slack organizations with all those buttons down the side. But if you are super interested in kind of all things codified security, infrastructure as code security, automated scanning, and all this kind of stuff, then that's what we chat about at slack.bridgecrew.io. So if you need to get in touch with me afterwards, they're probably the best ways. And so without further ado, I'm just going to give a bit of context first. We've done some security scanning research on why we think infrastructure as code security is so important, and why it really cannot be an afterthought in terms of DevOps, and why you don't really realize the value of kind of DevOps and automated pipelines unless you have security automated in that as well. And so we'll share some of that research, and then we'll look at what we can do about it. We'll look at one of our open source tools, Checkoff, how that can help make your life easier, whether it's ARM templates, Terraform, Kubernetes. I've already learned something on this session, the remote features for on-prem and kind of Kubernetes clusters on AWS while still having all the Azure services are pretty cool. I will say at the start, actually, I'm not kind of Azure native. I definitely don't spend as much time in Azure as I do in other cloud providers, just because of where a lot of my stuff personally is deployed. But yeah, so I would also love as well if you see anything in this presentation that I'm missing out some really cool way of doing it better, or by all means, like, call me up on that and let me know what features I'm missing out on. And yeah, so we'll cover IAC, we'll cover infrastructure as code scanning, some of the tools we can use, and kind of how at Bridge Crew we've tried to make it as simple as possible to kind of drop in some of these infrastructure as code security scanning benefits into your existing pipelines, be that Azure Devops, be that GitHub Actions, you name it, basically anywhere you can run a Python binary, really. But we will see that. So what are the problems kind of facing DevOps? When I said that, it's important that we automate this, why do we think that is the case at Bridge Crew? And, why was Bridge Crew effectively founded? So we'll do the kind of context of that first. And the simple fact is that, like, with DevOps allowing us to go from, a deployment maybe a week, or a deployment maybe a month or 6 months, if we're going back to waterfall, we're now in a scenario where we expect to see potentially multiple deployments to security a day. And while that might be to fix a bug or to get a really important feature out for a large client, the reasoning is generally going to be business related rather than specifically security related. And the problem is, even if you have a security advocate as part of your dev team, or even if you maybe have a dedicated security developer in that dev team, what's the point in automating the rest of the process with your tests, with your code scanning, with the deployment, the creation of cloud resources, if someone is still manually checking for security? Because realistically, with the amount of things that need checking for today, it's pointless. It's impossible to have someone read over a code change and go, yep, that's secure. If you think of all the different, for example, the CIS Azure guidelines, any kind of SOC 2, HIPAA, payment card industry compliances, the company you're working in might need to consider. If we just take one of those, for example, CIS Kubernetes 1.6, which I've spent far too much time in recently, that's 271 pages of recommendations. Is a security advocate on your team going to remember all of the recommendations from one of these compliance guides, let alone, the 5, 6, 7 of them that might apply to your environment, depending on what you're using? And so, with everything becoming infrastructure as code, that actually gives us the ability to go, okay, well, if everything's declared as code, if everything's declared as Terraform and ARM templates, that's great. We can take a more codified, pragmatic approach to kind of doing those security scans. But we absolutely have to, in order to reap the benefits of the what DevOps is about, which is effectively having that completely automated pipeline that allows developers to focus on features and product and all that good stuff. And without putting that automation in the pipeline, these are the kind of things we see. And it's interesting that I've had this conversation with some colleagues internally recently. Like, it sometimes gets not thought of as a high priority, because if you have a security issue in code, like it gets assigned a CVE, it gets assigned, a number that is Googleable and you will find it regardless of where you are. It gets assigned a score. It's a real security issue when something has a CVE. A lot of things we find in infrastructure as code are misconfigurations. They don't get assigned a CVE because it's not vulnerable code per se. It's just a default that maybe isn't a secure default. It's more of a usability default. So it leaves someone open to maybe some, a writable bucket, or the ability for someone to assume a role that they shouldn't have. They're not necessarily bugs in the code, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean they're any less important. The, numerous, I'm thinking of the StackRox one that I can't quite get off the tip of my tongue to quote, but I think they were saying something like 70% of, cloud attacks that ended up, costing a data leak or costing downtime or something that was a successful attack, all started with a misconfiguration rather than a CVE to get them that first hook into the environment. And sure, they might then exploit CVEs to kind of move around that environment and kind of break down security perimeters within that environment, but that first kind of initial accessing of the environment was due to a misconfiguration rather than a CVE. So just because they don't have CVEs, just because they're not in your application code definitely shouldn't be taken any less seriously. And in terms of, it's like, well, we have very secure Terraform, we have very secure ARM, you know, just like you will start a new Node project and watch in horror as Node downloads 100,000 different dependencies into your project file to bootstrap your simple front end web page. The same can be said of infrastructure as code, certainly with, you know, infrastructure as code types that have maybe been around longer. So, you know, things like Terraform, and actually during the life of the Kubernetes community, things like Helm. We see that most people don't write their own Terraform from scratch these days, because instead of writing 100 objects in Terraform, for example, to define, you know, a simple couple of VMs, all the necessary networking, all the necessary roles and things around it, someone will have written a module to make that easier in Terraform. And so people are just, you know, using those modules, copying those modules. But as soon as we start talking about code reuse, not within our companies, and not that this is a bad thing, and not that Terraform or IAC or Helm are bad at all, it's still better to have those things codified, tracked by Git. You can see exactly what was deployed when. But, you know, we're now in a scenario where what used to traditionally be operations now suffers from the same issues we have with development, where we have the arbitrary copying and pasting vulnerabilities from Stack Overflows. And again, might not be a CVE, but we will see that if there are infrastructure as code manifests for like reusable modules, so like Helm charts and Terraform modules, for example, if those are online, the author will generally have created a easy to use by default rather than secure by default posture, because someone's not going to read 10 pages of documentation on how to use a Terraform module. They're going to want the hello world that might not necessarily give them the secure defaults, because the secure defaults might require you going and setting up a certificate authority or some other stuff that, you know, people just don't have the patience for when they're trying to test whether a module suits their purpose. And so we regularly get, you know, less secure defaults in these infrastructure as code modules we're using, be it from Artifact Hub, Terraform Registry, et cetera, and lo and behold, these things, when they work, do find themselves magically in production, as we all know. So even if, you know, even if you are writing very secure code, very secure infrastructure as code internally, we still need someone to be checking these dependencies. We still need someone to be looking at what is the resultant set of infrastructure as code that gets run against your environment. And, you know, let's make sure that all those modules and all those dependencies don't have any nasties hiding them in them as well, because at the end of the day, it's all ending up in your Azure subscription. And so just a bit of a link for people interested in that side of things. We recently took all of the Helm charts from Artifact Hub and actually ran them through a scanner, a very hacky scanner that effectively just extracts the charts, looks at if they're dependent on any other charts, extracts those, and then passes those charts to our infrastructure as code security scanners, which we're going to cover in a live demo shortly. And we had a quick look at what is the default posture of those Helm charts. You know, if someone deployed that Helm chart with its defaults based on the instructions, how many of those have secure defaults and how many of those are opening that Kubernetes environment up to things that are against kind of the CIS Kubernetes guidelines, which is what a lot of the Kubernetes checks in our tools are written to validate against. And so we wrote this up in a 3-part blog series with kind of a load of information on like dependency graphing and all this kind of stuff. But the key stats for why everyone should care about this is, you know, of the 2,300 Helm charts we scanned, you know, 46% of them, you know, 46% of the checks within those Helm charts, within the 6,500 Kubernetes templates rendered from those Helm charts, had policy violations, things that would not pass if you were trying to be kind of CIS Kubernetes compliant. And so by default, there is quite a lot of risk coming in from me reusing infrastructure as code. So definitely something you want in your CI pipeline alongside your application tests and all that other stuff. And what was also really interesting, just one takeaway for hopefully people that are interested in this stuff, maybe it's just me, but the whole point of code reuse, the whole point of modules being available online is so that people use that one instead of creating 7 different modules. And yet we actually found even within an individual organization's Helm repo on Artifact Hub, you can see here in the blue, there were 3 completely different Helm charts within a single organization for deploying Redis. There were 3 different ones for deploying MySQL. There were 3 different ones for deploying Postgres, which, as you can imagine, just adds a lot more complexity. It makes being sure that everyone is on the latest version, the most secure version across an organization. It was just kind of interesting to see that, yes, we can pull this data and use these modules, but we're still not kind of there in a, known good configuration, either with the security faults or with the kind of using different things from different places. And so this brings us on to kind of what can we do about it? And some of you may have already played with it, and that's awesome. If not, we're going to go through it. So we have an open source tool called Checkoff. And Checkoff is designed to be a static analysis scanner for infrastructure as code. So just like you might run static analysis in your CI against your application code, we have taught Checkoff through policies to know, whether a default is secure based on CIS guidelines or other PCI DSS, for example, whether not putting something in an ARM template means that will or won't be secure by default. Is it a good default? Is it set to false when it should be true? We can go more complex than that. We also check for things like, access management, asterisks and stars, as kind of was mentioned at the start of the call. And it's like, hey, we think this is a really wide open policy. You probably don't want to put this into your infrastructure, and things like that. But it's basically a load of checks to test whether reading through your infrastructure before it's even become cloud resources. So Checkoff is making its decisions based off the ARM templates, the Terraform templates, the Kubernetes manifests that it can access. So before a single bit of cloud object is actually created, Checkoff's going to provide some, hey, that's an insecure default. You probably want to change this. You want to set this to true. This stuff is not things you want in your environment. And so without further ado, let's dive in. Can I just quickly check, can people see my terminal now?
Yep.
Wonderful. Not that I don't trust Mac's screen sharing or anything, but I have been bitten by it before, so it makes me a little bit concerned. So what I've got here is a very simple example. You can download Checkoff with pip, just pip install Checkoff, or brew install Checkoff, or we have a Docker container if you want to run it and just kind of map in your code to be scanned. What I have here is a few things, but in Azure ARM, I have a storage directory with an ARM template in, basically. And by the way, like I said, I don't spend as much time in Azure as I do in other cloud providers, but I absolutely do love ARM, and I love that pretty much everywhere in the Azure interface, you can always get to the ARM template of the representative object that you may have created in the UI, in the web interface. I think that's a really, really nice touch, just being able to say, I don't need to write this this infrastructure as code myself. I've already got one example. Give me the ARM template that would create me another one, and then I can go and edit the bits that matter to me. I think that's a really, really nice touch from Azure. I'll just have a quick look at this in VS Code because it's nicer to look at. And what we can see here is we're just basically creating some simple storage on Azure. And so what I'm going to do with it is I'm just going to run Checkoff, and by default, I'm just going to say, scan everything you can find in this local directory, and if it looks like infrastructure as code, run tests against it. And what we'll see is Checkoff's going to come back. And I've currently got cloud integration turned on, which we'll cover in a moment. If you do an offline scan, it's pretty much instant. In fact, I can show you that actually. I'm struggling to find my, don't know what's going on there. Anyway, ignore me for a sec and we will carry on. So yeah, in here, Azure ARM, I have the storage, and in fact, in compute, we also have some more ARM template for creating a simple Ubuntu VM as well. And so yeah, if I run Checkov-d, just locally against this directory, what's going to happen is Checkoff's going to go and use its built-in policies. Now, those policies are actually part of Checkov itself. So within every new version of Checkoff, if you do a pip update Checkoff, there's no policy packs. They're actually just part of the code base. So we will see those in a sec. So if I just nip back into my environment, and you can get to those with --list. And that's going to spit out all the currently built-in things in this version of Checkoff. A reason this is cool is it's a single tool that immediately adds value. You don't have to go, okay, I've got the scanning tool, now where do I get the policy packs from? Every time you update, you're going to get more and more useful policies. And if we just have a look for Azure policies. You can see we have a load of policies for a load of different Azure resources. And what we get here is an individual check ID. And that's important for kind of getting more context on some of these. And then the object that those checks will fire against, and then kind of a description of the check itself. So, you know, make sure that the PostgreSQL server enables customer managed key for encryption will be in a CIS guideline somewhere. Ensure that Microsoft anti-malware is configured. Allow access to Azure services from that day, you know, is just a load of common security defaults, which we can check for whether you are using ARM or whether you are using Terraform or, you know, a bunch of other infrastructure as code languages. Similar for Kubernetes. I think that's one of the things that kind of separates Checkov. It's not trying to be for a specific one. We know that chances are, if you are in a cloud environment, you don't have the luxury of having everything in ARM or everything in Terraform. You probably have some Kubernetes manifests, some Docker containers. And so we didn't want to be a tool that just did one language. The way it's implemented internally, the way that the checks are all within the code base makes it really easy to customize and write your own checks if you wanted to, by just kind of looking through the code and picking a check that's very similar to what you're trying to achieve and kind of, you know, grokking that internal checks language. So as you can see here, what you can do, however, is if you are looking for specific frameworks, you can just say, actually, don't find me anything else, just find me ARM templates within the directory. You can skip frameworks. You can specifically tell Checkoff to only run certain checks, which might be useful for maybe turning off certain checks, you know, noisy checks in dev or testing, but kind of turning them on before the production pipeline and things like that. So what we get as an output on any Checkoff run is basically the checks that have passed based on what resources we found in the files we scanned. So that triggered and it passed. And then we get whatever failures we have found. And for each failure, we get the file that the issue was found in. We get the object, so in this case, an ARM storage account object. And then we get the actual part of the code base. And you, with flags, you can tell it to make this shorter. You can output this in JSON, so you can post-process it if you wanted to. And what we can see here is it's giving us some insights onto things with our storage configuration that we probably want to address. And so we'll see those here. And then if we click on one of these links, for each individual check, we also have this kind of context page. And this is almost just like trying, if you have this in your CI/CD pipeline and it's, the pipeline errors because Checkoff is finding these issues, this just kind of provides context to maybe non-security focused people on the team as to what it is, why it matters, and just trying to provide you with that additional context, which might be a bit nasty to try and paste into the CLI console. So each check comes with a link where we try and add relevant information to provide that context. And you can see here all the other topics for all those other checks. So in a nutshell,
Matt, it might be worth just taking a pause for a sec there. It looks like we've got a few questions
sounds great.
in the chat window. So the first one is, does this work with Bicep, or is that in the pipeline?
No, at the moment it doesn't. As we saw with help, we currently support, where has it gone? Just these frameworks.
Okie doke. Can you skip checks from a central file?
Yes, you can. In fact, we've actually just last week introduced a configuration file option. So basically everything, so for example, as you can imagine, with all these options and all these frameworks, configuration of Checkoff was starting to look a little bit like this. Which, as you can imagine, when you're saying, actually, I want to scan this directory, I want compact output, I might want to scan some Docker file images as well, which we now support, rather than just the infrastructure as code, just the Docker file and the Kubernetes. We can actually use some of the APIs we've gained access to through the Palo Alto acquisition to also scan the images as part of the Checkoff run as well, which is kind of cool. But as you can imagine, this configuration of like which checks you want to skip and which checks you maybe just want to run is going to get quite long. So what we can now do is we can actually do a create config checkoff.yaml. And if we do that, in fact, if I just run that command, what we'll then get is a configuration file, and Checkoff will look by default for checkoff.yaml in either the current working directory where Checkoff is run and the directory that you specified if you specified -d or -- directory, and then we'll also fail back to looking for one in the user's profile home directory. And if it finds one, it will effectively then run Checkoff without any parameters. So we'll be able to just run Checkoff like this, and it will run based on that configuration file. Now, I don't have a test dir called test dir, so that would be a bit pointless. I'll just Control-C that. But you will see here, it's very simple, and all of the kind of things you would expect on the command line are kind of very similarly named as part of the configuration here. And this is really useful. So not only will we look for those checkoff.yamls, you can also specify the config file as a single parameter item on the Checkoff CLI. So we have some users that have been requesting this for having, for example, slightly different Checkoff configurations, depending on whether it's a CI pipeline running in dev or test or a production branch. So they can kind of customize what they do and don't want to see, how noisy maybe they do or don't want infrastructure as code policies to be on those different areas.
And a follow-on from that actually came in. So can the config file only contain checks to be skipped?
You can contain checks to be skipped, or you can invert that and say, I only want to run these checks. You can also, with Checkoff, have it pull in a Git repo or a local directory of custom checks. And there's actually wildcards supported in these. So let's say you didn't want to use any of the built-in checkoff checks, you could skip check CKV _star. And then if you have named your custom checks that you're bringing in via Git or via a directory, something other than CKV star, then you would only run the checks that you've provided.
And the final one, is the automation done in the JSON script?
How do you mean automation? Sorry. My
Yes,
apologies.
Simon, you might want to jump off mute for that one.
Can it be done in a JSON script? Like all the skip checks can be done in a JSON script?
Oh, instead of YAML, you
Oh,
mean?
instead of YAML. No, we currently just support YAML, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But a valid point that we probably should support both, considering that that's what everyone else does with things like Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Yes, and ironically, we also can output Checkoff. We can also output Checkoff in JSON. So yes,
All right.
that's a valid point. That is something I'll quickly show actually.
Sure. Thank you.
No worries at all. So with, let's just say we're currently scanning the local directory again. We can do -o JSON instead of the output we were previously seeing. And what that's going to do is for each, there's a nice obvious schema where even the lines of the code that you got on the CLI are part of a little JSON array for each check. And so if you did want to go and do some like custom parsing afterwards with that, you can do. Like I said, I'm going to come on to Checkov bridge crew integration, where we send a load of the data to be scanned by bridge crew as well, which is why this is slightly delayed on output. But we'll come on to that in a little bit. So as you can see here, you get a summary section, so you can very easily parse that. You can save this with which version of Checkov was running, because that will depend on which checks were available at that time. If any parsing errors occurred, if any files or checks were skipped based on your config, and you can see then we have a rather large chunk of JSON for basically everything you could see in the CLI if you wanted to do some post-processing. Awesome. And with that, we'll carry on. And so I know, very much I'm focused here. But as I said, like I strongly do believe that we have, it's very rare that there is the luxury of someone having just one type of infrastructure as code, especially when we're in a Kubernetes age and Docker files all over the place. And so if you do want to just play with the kind of principles of Checkov and understand it a little more, and want something easy and something that you can not worry about kind of breaking rather than your own code bases, we do have a couple of purposely vulnerable kind of training repos. And the first one I'd recommend is TerraGoat, which I've got checked out here as well. And within TerraGoat, we have Terraform for all the major cloud providers. And so if we go into Azure here, we can see we have a load of different Terraform for a load of different Azure services, and we have tried to make this as insecure as possible. So we definitely don't recommend doing a TF apply and actually putting this into a real environment. But what we do recommend is kind of using this to play with and to see what output's happening, to understand what Checkoff does, how you skip checks. If you want something to play around with in a kind of safe sandboxy environment, that's exactly what TerraGoat is for. And you'll see that it spits out a whole load of issues. And in fact, actually, we run Checkov directly against TerraGoat itself to dynamically generate the list of policy violations that TerraGoat has. So if we go and find here, these are all issues which TerraGoat contains because we've tried to make it as insecure as possible. And you can see there's a load of Azure policies. And just to let you know, this does actually scroll, or it should scroll. Looks like we've broken the markdown a little bit there. But yeah, you can see it's very, very vulnerable. So definitely don't deploy it. And you can see you'll see the same outputs if you run Checkoff directly against that yourself. And again, each one has these links and things like that. So TerraGo, we also have a couple of others for different styles of IAC. One we don't maintain is Kubernetes Goat. But if you Google Kubernetes Goat from GitHub, I can't recommend that resource enough if you're into kind of Kubernetes security. It doesn't just cover kind of scanning Kubernetes Goat with Checkoff to find issues in your Kubernetes or your Helm manifests. It also goes into kind of cluster security and kind of container escapes and things like that. It's a great resource. So this is all well and good, right? We can take Checkoff and we can use it to find things that maybe we wouldn't have caught ourselves, maybe we didn't realize were insecure defaults. In the case of Terraform, it will also allow you to basically ask Checkoff to scan modules. So if your piece of Terraform is relying on a module, Checkoff will go and scan that module as well to make sure that within the module there aren't any kind of insecure nasties lurking based on kind of the Helm work I was talking about before with reusing modules from the internet. So this is all well and good. We can do this point in time, and as I'm sure a lot of you have realized, okay, it's just a binary. It definitely exits with a 1 when there's any issues found. So yes, I can easily put that in my CI/CD pipeline, and we'll cover that in a moment. But also, it's important to think that the pipeline is obviously the place that Checkoff was designed to go. No one's going to be mandating that engineers kind of run this manually as an extra step in their, git add, git commit, git push lifecycle, like I'm doing to show you on my terminal. But at the same time, it's not the only place we should really be thinking about running things like this. So if we think about the whole life cycle from the moment a piece of code gets written, or infrastructure code in this case, like some ARM or something defining a piece of infrastructure we need for a new project or for a new feature, we have more and more information which may impact the security posture of that piece of infrastructure. The closer we get to actually running it in Azure, the closer we get to running it in a runtime environment. And that might be because the infrastructure as code language we're using is actually pulling variables or information from the target environment to use as part of the template that it's pushing. And so until you're in a CI/CD pipeline that actually has access to that deployment environment, we might be pulling a variable that configures a security group. We might not be able to flag, hey, that's a really wide open security group, you shouldn't be doing that, because until we know where that variable is coming from, it's unresolved. Checkoff doesn't know that security group is or isn't wide open, for example. That said, the complexity and the time and effort it takes to fix something is the other way around. The closer we are to the developer's IDE, it's a hell of a lot easier to fix something that's never been saved to a file, let alone committed or pushed to a branch or merged into master or deployed. So yes, we have more information further on, but it's easier to fix a lot of the low-hanging fruit earlier in the dev cycle. And so based on that, we kind of suggest that, compute is cheap. We all have these CI/CD pipelines running at various stages. We all have, oodles of power available on our development environments, on our laptops. So actually running the same set of policies across your entire lifecycle, if it can be automated so that it's not a headache to your developers, actually gives you a really strong point. And to that end, let's have a look at the VS Code plugin. So what we've done is we've taken Checkoff and we've made it into a VS Code plugin. So at the very start of this pipeline, instead of having to run Checkoff manually and adding to the developers, tasks on their day-to-day workflow, what we can see is from earlier when I opened the storage.json, we're actually seeing in the problems output, we've got Checkoff down here saying I found some issues. This is available on the VS Code, I'm going to use the right terminology, extensions store. So just find Checkoff or search for bridge crew in there. And what we can see is that not only is it annotating the individual sections, so if I hover over that little red squiggle, we get, a recommendation from Checkoff, we get the same information, we get the ability to click the link to, those guidelines that we were talking about earlier from the regular Checkoff output. And we also, if it is something that is a really simple Boolean, hey, actually, we know that the way to fix that is to set, this value equals true. For example, we also offer in VS Code the ability to do quick fixes, so that we can just dynamically add that for the developer into that code, and they can get on with their job. If there aren't quick fixes for a specific thing, we also dynamically know how to generate skip comments. So from someone earlier that was asking how you can configure Checkoff to either run certain checks or not run certain checks, yes, you can do that on the command line and in the config file for Checkoff itself, but you can also annotate all of the infrastructure as code formats we support. So we know that this was failing on Azure 34. And what we can then do is add a Checkoff annotated skip comment, which is automatically put in for us. And we can leave reasons in the Git commit as to, in this scenario, because of XYZ. Or, this is an acceptable risk because of what we're doing with this. This has been, speak to this person or this person. And, you can tell Checkoff this way, to not check 34, but only against this specific resource. In the same way, if you had like a Golang security scanner, like GoSec, you can specifically say, yeah, don't scan this line of code. I know, but it's okay because of X, Y, and Z. So we support that style of format as well. And yeah, you can see the VS Code plugin is going to be super useful rather than having to expect the developer to run things, to run Checkoff manually. I mean, before the VS Code plugin, there was also a case of using GitHub pre-commit hooks to run Checkoff before you actually commit that commit into Git, which also is a pretty good way of doing it. But yeah, the VS Code plugin is getting quite a lot of love, and by all means, give it a try if you think that's useful to you. So on that whole idea of all the way forward and all the way back, from IDE right to runtime, this is kind of where Bridge Crew sees that gap between our open source tools and then the pieces that are handled by Bridge Crew as a platform. Obviously, Checkoff runs wherever there is compute, but it's not something that's sitting, as a daemon running in the background. It's not listening to webhooks. And for things like scanning those policies against runtime in your actual Azure or your other cloud provider environments, or doing things like automatically triggering and annotating pull requests or merge requests to help a team, see those comments in that pull request. Obviously, something like Checkoff isn't going to particularly be very good at doing that because it needs to be running all the time. And so the Bridge Crew platform is kind of where we extend Checkoff to provide that whole end-to-end visibility. And as I said, we actually had configured Checkoff in the runs we were previously doing to speak to the Bridge Crew platform. And so at the end of each of the runs, you would see this, which you wouldn't see if you hadn't integrated it with the Bridge Crew API key. And these links allow you to see a consolidated view in Bridge Crew of all of the different Checkoff instances that might be running in your CI/CD pipeline, all kind of in one place. And the same kind of information is available. We are providing recommendations for automated fixes as and where we can, as you can see from here. This is how you fix this kind of thing and all that good stuff. But that's just one of the things that the integration with the Bridge Crew platform allows you to do. So it gives you a world view of incidents across Git repos that are scanned automatically, across annotating pull requests, and things like that. And then obviously, if you do have a kind of security team or like a security overwatch or someone that is like a security advocate across a few DevOps teams, then this consolidated view where they can filter by benchmarks, they can filter by where bridge crew is finding this information. So you can see here, this is for example, this is a subscription for a Azure runtime account. So do I have any issues based on any of these policies that have actually made it through? Checkoff hasn't stopped them because maybe we weren't scanning with Checkoff at that point when we deployed this, or maybe it's a brownfield deployment that's been there forever. Do I have anything in the runtime environment which has kind of made it past all my checks, and I know I have some non-compliant security issues to deal with? And we've got one here related to a few default items, saying that the standard pricing tier should be selected. I would imagine, yep, that's from the CIS Azure 1.1 benchmark. And we can see that because this is just a free trial account I've used as a demo, it's flagging up just as a potential issue, as a low priority, that these are things that should be changed. And you can see this is showing it's from my Azure account. And then if I go back to my filters, I can see that I'm also getting things coming in from other cloud providers' accounts. I'm getting things coming in from Git repos that were automatically scanning. And as I said, I can drill down to just high and critical issues and, start building up a view of what I need to target from like a security operations perspective, or even just a dev team that actually wants a single pane of glass across all the different Checkoff instances running in all the different CI pipelines. We try and break this out into really developer-friendly views. So if you only care about your repo, we have a projects view where for each Git repo we've identified, you can specifically look at that repo and a specific branch, and we'll show you things in a little more project-centric view, who last edited things, who has contributed to this repo, and things like that. And then also things like code reviews, where, as I said, every time you connect Checkoff to the APIs, you can see these were all the ones I was just running on my local CLI. Each of these shows us every time we run a connected version, we get the log here, and we can go through it in like CI by CI, but consolidated across a load of different environments. And all this is enabled through the integrations page, as you can see. So if I click on Azure Read Only, it's successfully connected to our Azure environment. If I add a subscription, it's giving me a little bit of custom Terraform to basically go and create the Active Directory role and all the other little bits needed for bridge crew to be able to have a read-only way of scanning what's currently running and all the metadata surrounded by that. And the way that actually works is we then just pull out those ARM templates and scan them effectively as if they were pre-deployed, as we're doing with the ARM templates locally. So we can run the same sets of policies, whether you're in runtime or whether you're right back at that VS Code start or anywhere in between. And then for things like Git repos, we can automatically scan those as well. So let's say you wanted things to show up in incidents, or you wanted to be alerted in Slack if we'd found something that breaks one of those Checkoff policies. If you didn't want to do any CI, but you just wanted to know that your kind of main branch or whichever branches you set are being scanned, you can just directly integrate your Git repos, and then the Bridge Crew platform will go and scan those automatically for you. Just a quick word on some fancy things we can do with GitHub and GitHub Enterprise. Currently not supported in Azure, but if you do use the GitHub or GitLab integrations, I talked about this briefly before, we do automatic pull request annotations, which I find are super useful. So for example, if we go and find, oh, that's weird. There we go. My apologies. If we go and have a look here at some pull requests that someone's tried to merge into this repo, whether you are a security expert or not, these are obviously going to be really helpful for anyone on the team going, actually, okay, maybe we shouldn't merge this pull request because it looks like we've got some fairly insecure defaults or things that are going to cause us some high severity security issues if we allow this to be deployed. In this case, it's Terraform. But super useful to have that information directly in the developer's day-to-day workflow, in kind of a way they'd be expecting people to add code reviews. And they're just enabled by default by enabling the GitHub integration. Another thing that's worth mentioning is when you have something like Checkoff integrated into your CI pipeline, obviously that's great because Checkoff is going to be able to stop that CI pipeline. It's all well and good having GitHub scanning and saying, yes, you've got issues in your Git repo. Pull requests really useful, but CI is the real place where Checkoff can actually go, nope, this is not allowed to continue. This is not being pushed to production. Obviously, CI is not the place to start fixing things and making temporal changes to your ARM templates because, Git is your source of truth. And so another reason we do source control integration is for things that we do know how to kind of, single click fix, because it's just that simple. Yep, that needs to be set to true. You need to set this parameter, et cetera, et cetera. For things like that, and let me just very quickly show an example of this with a couple of repos in Git. So if I find Azure example here, for ones that we propose are really simple, like kind of that Boolean doesn't require specifics from your environment or the dev team. Obviously, I'm struggling to find one. Let's try this here. But anyway, my point being the ones that we present, like we saw earlier, that kind of diff view with the red and green, and we know how to fix, we can just tick that and we can click fix. And what that'll do is that'll just raise a pull request, just like a developer had gone and fixed it themselves, against that repo using that integration. And those fixes come from Bridge Crew, and they're like, hey, this is fixing this. Click here for details in the platform as to why we're trying to fix this. And you'll see that the only thing that's changed in these PRs is what we'd be highlighting in the platform as the hey, this is our recommended diff to make this particular policy violation go away. And so, as I said, kind of Bridge Crew, using the Bridge Crew platform allows you to kind of do stuff that Checkoff on its own cannot do because the platform is SaaS, it's running all the time. So we can do like the webhooks to GitHub and GitLab and all that kind of good stuff. And also the runtime scanning to kind of complete that journey from the policies from start to end. But you still would want, whether you're an open source user, whether you're an open source plus Bridge Crew user, at a certain point, you're going to want Checkoff somewhere in your CI/CD pipeline. And so on that end, last but very not least, it's fairly easy. Like I said, it outputs in whatever format you want. You might want to take that artifact and do something with it in JSON. You might want to save that, or you might just use it to know that it's going to spit out that CLI and it's going to block if there's any policy violations. You might have those Checkoff config files to specify things you do and don't care about checking for in different dev test environments. But whatever you're choosing to do with it, as I'm sure you appreciate, it's a fairly simple addition to a CI/CD pipeline. So if we have a look at my Azure Devops environment here, we can actually see a job which has run and it's failed. So if we told it to not soft fail, that would have obviously stopped that build and we wouldn't have gone any further, as you can see. And what we get is the output you would regularly expect. We get the Checkoff output, and this would run completely standalone. And if that's what you need, then please do go use open source Checkoff. Obviously, with a secret in this pipeline with the CI/CD key, it means that whatever Checkoff finds here is also getting reported up into the Bridge Crew platform in the code reviews page, and you'll see it, there. And so a really nice way of centrally consolidating, but on its own, really, really useful. And, if you're going to have one takeaway for trying to kind of up the security posture of your infrastructure as code, just have Checkoff somewhere in your CI/CD pipeline, and maybe give the VS Code extension a spin, just so you can kind of see what issues you have, or just run Checkoff directly against your master branch and see what's already there. And so you can see here the Checkoff output. And if we go and look at this pipeline that we've created, it's super, super simple. So I've not done any deployment steps at this point because I didn't want to deploy my my new bucket. But what you can see, we're just using an Ubuntu VM, and we're effectively saying install Python and then pip install Checkoff. And then we're running Checkoff currently with the CLI options, but you could just as easily make sure that you have the new Checkoff config file in the base of your directory, and we'd pick that up. So you could just have Checkoff, and you could separate your CI/CD configuration from your Checkoff configuration if that's neater for you to run that. And then, as you can see, we just have one variable at the moment, which is the BC API key, which we're using to do the cloud integration. Now, repo ID and branch master are just for what shows up as usability information in code reviews. Obviously, you could set those based on the built-in variables within the CI/CD pipeline, so they would, you could have a cookie cutter one that would always work for all your projects. For this example, just for clarity, I've obviously just hard-coded them with this. And then if you are more of a GitHub Actions user than an Azure Devops user, but obviously still targeting Azure with Terraform or ARM templates, then we actually have a GitHub Actions marketplace item for Checkoff. So instead of needing to do the install Python and then pip installing step, you can actually just run, and I'll show you an example of that. You can actually just easily put Checkoff directly into your environment. Hang on a sec. There we go. Have a look at TerraGoat here and have a look at Actions. And we'll see that as part of building TerraGoat, we run Checkoff, and that looks very similar. Here we go. So yeah, what you'll see is that's a bad example. We're actually doing some custom stuff there to generate the output. But yeah, if we just go GitHub Actions, Checkoff, you can see it's in the marketplace, and you can literally just go run the Checkoff action, and that's it. And we actually support directly using some of the configuration options in the action itself. Obviously, personal choice if you want to use that, or you would rather just dump the new Checkoff config file directly in your repo. Both of those will work. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of running Checkoff as part of your pipeline. The things you can then do to extend that with Bridge Crew, so that you're not just scanning a point of time, you're also doing the runtime scanning and the PR annotations, which could be useful for, like I said, a security team, or kind of consolidating everything into one place. And as I said, with runtime scanning, we've kind of already covered it. We've jumped around a little bit, as is often the case with these things. As you saw, we integrated the Azure environment, and it gave us that one alert about triggering a CIS guideline for the different payment defaults. But obviously, if there was more in that environment that was triggering any of these policies, you'd get that from runtime as well. And then you can now put that to Slack or Jira, or wherever you are best to alert your teams. And with that, I'll probably call it there and see if anyone has any questions.
Hi, Matt. Do you mind if I ask one? I put it in the chat earlier on. It's Darren here.
Hey, Darren.
I've been playing with Checkoff for all of a day, so obviously I'm an expert now. But I found it really easy to use. But a couple of questions that I found was the config file, which I didn't realise was new. I'd asked about, can you skip the checks? What I'd like to do, if possible, is just put the checks to be skipped in the config file, but leave everything else on the command line. Is that possible, or is it a one-shot deal kind of thing?
Yeah, currently the command line overrides the config file. So
Okay.
yeah, that's not possible at the moment. You'd either have to have everything in the config file or everything on the command line. We did talk internally about doing, like, complex merges and stuff, and just decided that was probably a road to insanity.
No, that does make sense. That's cool. And then I've got a second part. So I played with something that you haven't shown with Azure Devops, where you use the output to put it into Azure Devops under the tests, and you get like a nice graphical interface, and it's really cool. The only thing that was missing for me, and again, it's probably user error on my part, was when you use the CLI, you get a lovely URL that says this is why you should turn this on or turn this off, and a link. But when you push it into Azure Devops, you just get the check that was there. Am I missing something, or is there a way to get those output links in the Azure Devops JUnit output?
Yes. So that's using, one of the other outputs, I'll just provide a bit of context. One of the other outputs for Checkoff is JUnit XML, which obviously a lot of CI/CD providers can then render, so that you get that nice kind of graph of passed and failed checks, and a nice kind of table of just a nicer formatted way of seeing that in CI/CD, without needing kind of any extra third-party dependencies. That will just be a formatting of what we've chosen to put into JUnit XML. And yes, there's no options for what does and doesn't go into JUnit XML. It's just, do you want JUnit XML output? So I should imagine that will technically be a bug of we've not surfaced that information when we're generating the XML.
That'd be fantastic if you could, because that was the one thing that was missing for it from it. For me, it was really good.
Okay, yeah, noted. I will create an issue for that as we speak. Yeah, really appreciate the feedback on that. And yeah,
no worries. Thank you.
For anyone else that uses Checkoff, don't be put off by the issues list in GitHub. We have a really vibrant community. You'll see from the commits and the version count. We're merging PRs daily, and the community really does care about kind of supporting people's use cases. So by all means, do create a new issue. Do join the Slack and kind of recommend ways you're using it and things you'd like to see in the platform. Or if you're that way inclined, we'll always happily accept a PR as well.
Yeah, it looks good. I was just creating my own organization and taking a look at some of the GitHub repos as well, that or the Terraform modules that are in GitHub, to go and spin up the linking between the Azure subscriptions and the Bridge Crew console there as well. So yeah, all looks good.
I had a question actually for your Azure community. Obviously, we have some absolute kind of Terraform rock stars, and so when your hammer looks like Terraform, everything looks like a Terraform problem. So from the Azure integration, when someone using Azure is trying to integrate their runtime environment with Bridge Crew, would you expect that to be, hey, just run this little bit of Terraform? Or would you expect that to be, hey, go into the Azure GUI and import this ARM template or something like that? Should it be ARM over Terraform, or do you think that most of your users are probably comfortable using both?
I'd be interested in the community speaking up before I do, because I'd probably have my own views.
Terraform over ARM from Darren. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, these are just some questions on usability. When there are so many options for getting something into a cloud environment, it's always like, have we chosen the right one? So yeah, anyone disagrees with Darren, please do let me know. But cool.
I think that was the only thing potentially from my perspective, was as I go and add an Azure subscription into a Bridge Crew account there, I'm automatically greeted by having to go and use Terraform. So it does put that dependency on, even if I'm using ARM templates or Bicep, as other people mentioned earlier. I have to use Terraform to go and not necessarily. I don't have to. I was kind of working back the Terraform module, understanding what it does. So it's possible to do it that way. So that might be a nice alternate way, is just having like a GUI driven approach exactly. Of
Maybe offer both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for I don't know if I'm allowed to say the word AWS on this meetup.
We'll allow it.
I know for AWS, I don't know whether it's intentional or not, but they basically allow you to pass in like a CloudFormation template to like as a parameter on a really long URL. So we can effectively click from the Bridge Crew platform, and if you are logged into an AWS account, it will load the "Do you want to deploy this CloudFormation" screen, and that's how we do the AWS integration. So I don't know whether it's just possible that there isn't that same URL to kind of not use and abuse, as it were, to kind of make that user experience as simple as it is.
Yeah, that's something we should definitely chat about, because you can deploy ARM templates through a URL, as long as they're kind of held somewhere publicly that they can be accessed.
Awesome.
Because that's what a lot of our Azure quick start templates do. But
Okay.
the only thing I'm not sure on, no, you could do the role assignments. It's just whether you could create the role. I don't think you could do that bit, but something we could explore. We can definitely have a chat about that one.
Would love to take that offline. Yeah, if we could use your experience to make that UX better for people running Azure, that'd be awesome.
Cool.
Cheers.
So, folks, any final questions here for Matt at all? I think there were lots of great questions as we were going through.
I enjoyed that. It was a nice little break to do question time rather than keeping it all for the end. Because I think by the time you get through like an hour's talking of all these kind of different concepts, the context of the question sometimes goes missing halfway through. So yeah, appreciate everyone jumping in on those.
Maybe one final one from me then, something I was thinking at the very beginning there, and I think I see the answer, but I want to make sure I do, if that makes sense. So I guess with Checkoff, you're really using it as a policy rules engine to check infrastructure as code, so Terraform on templates, etc. But if in the Azure world, I guess you've got things like Azure Policy, for example, which will check it on the runtime environment. I guess the challenge with something like Terraform, for example, is the state is held elsewhere. So as soon as you've committed the state, Azure Policy makes changes. It's no longer representative of the state that's kind of running, kind of thing. Is that the idea that you're trying to solve? Is you're getting there ahead of the game before the state is even solved? I'm just trying to understand the difference between like Checkoff, which would do it on the infrastructure as code, versus Azure Policy, for example.
Yeah, I think, and both is good is always a valid answer when it comes to security. If the tools are available, enable them. What we are trying to do, and it's a really cheesy kind of marketing tagline, but it perfectly sums it up. It's like code to cloud. We want to know which bit of infrastructure as code categorically created which resource, and we want to see when you fix an issue. Let's say there's an issue in runtime because you weren't scanning with Checkoff or you weren't using any security tooling at this point. We literally want to see those flags go from red to green at the point you at the point you raise a PR, and the PR is like, yep, you're not introducing anything new. Then we want to see it go green in the code repo. Then we want to see it pass through the CI/CD, and then we want to see finally the issue go away in the production environment. And we just want to know that entire life cycle is being looked at, rather than only trying to solve problems once they're already a vulnerable piece of cloud infrastructure.
Gotcha. That makes complete sense. Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you.
No worries at all.
So unless we've got Anyone else? I think all we have to say, Josip, I think it's over to you to do the next pieces.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. This is really interesting talk. Although I must admit that the last time I doubled with the Terraform was well, in ancient times, compared to what you said. I mean, we had to migrate the entire cloud platform from on-prem data centers into Azure. And I'm not going to share the pain we've gone through. And obviously, there wasn't Checkoff or anything like that. So I'm really pleased to see how far technology have gone since.
Awesome.
But thank you. It's such a nice talk.
Thank you so much for having me. Cheers.
No worries. So Chris, I'm not sure if you can share the slide. So just quickly to
Certainly
wrap
can.
up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I believe we've covered the questions now, but by all means, if anyone has got any questions, please do ask them anytime or send them to us. So very exciting to mention this. We got our very own Chris presenting on the next meetup, how GitHub can help in planning, building and deploying a podcast blog site. So if there are any budding podcasters or bloggers or anyone who wants to learn more how to do that, and then on top of that, doing that GitHub next meetup is certainly for you. So I hope to see you in a large numbers joining us. But if you know any of your colleagues or friends, acquaintances that might be interested in this, please do share the news and link to the meetup site with them. That's going to be in July 20th. So hopefully not many of us will be on the holidays. Thank you, Chris. We'll go next one. And again, as I say, thanks, Matt. Thanks everyone for joining. I know it's a bit hot, and the football looming on all of us. So, I really appreciate everyone coming along and making such a great session out of this meetup. So I would stop blubbing very soon and just let everyone socializing and connecting if anyone is up for that. But one thing I want to mention, we're always on the lookout for great speakers like Matt. So I think Alicia just shared the Sessionize link, which we use to sort of capture ideas and potential presenters. So if you have any ideas, any suggestion, anything you would want to present, please do submit those to Sessionize, and we will be very happy to consider those. So as an early warning, obviously we still got the July and August go through, but in September we will be having an evening of lightning talk. So it'll be not a usual one talk which covers the specific topic, but we'll have a number of smaller lightning talks. And look, it's as much as we have idea what that might look like, we would be very appreciative if you can share again on the Sessionize your ideas. What would you like to see? What would be of interest, and then even more if you would be willing to present. So yeah, Sessionize is your next stop, I would say.
And we are a friendly bunch. We are a friendly little community. So if you've never spoken before in front of anyone and you've always wanted to do it, or maybe you've got something that you've been working on and you want to share, this is the perfect opportunity.
Yes, take this as a sort of testing ground. If you have budding ambition to speak on a large audience, I mean, this group is really benevolent, as Chris suggested, and then we certainly going to encourage you, if anything else. So please. Okay. I think that's everything. Unless anyone got any questions, really, not necessarily related to presentation, but in terms of particularly about the meetup or session as how things work, or any suggestions, we would be very happy to hear about those. Chris, I believe you're on mute at the moment. So
That is right. Yes, thank you for that.
No worries.
I was just going to say I'll stop the recording here just so we. I would try stop the recording, but I don't seem to be able to. This could be fun. Let me try this. I'm just going to stop it so we can all speak freely, but apparently we're not allowed that luxury. But we can edit this bit out of the recording anyway, so consider it not recorded. So yeah, I guess to Josip's point, what type of topics would you like to see more of, folks? Less of? It's been a while since we've done a bit of a check-in with the community here, so we'd love to know what's top of your mind. Anything we can take away.
Or even what do you think about the current format, or how do you find it? Time, schedule. What would you like to see? Any recommendations? We would be very, very happy to hear and take your feedback.
Have you done much on the security side of Azure? I haven't really joined all of your meets, but just wondering if, because that's the bit that kind of interests me. I've come from the user and the devices side, so it's really important there. But I assume it's important for the Azure side and all the RBAC stuff on that side.
Yeah.
Do you cover that?
Yeah, we had excuse me, we did have a talk. That's been about 2 or 3 months ago now, but it was a broader like compliance, identity, security type topic. But is there, question back to you, Dean, is there anything specifically security wise that you're looking for? Is it like a bit of a deep dive around Sentinel, Security Center, both? What kind of thing are you looking for?
Well, I guess it's how it all fits in together, because you're talking about a lot of infrastructure stuff. I do users and devices and get all those secure and make sure users have MFA and admins are doing the right thing for their roles. But how does it work with what you guys have just shown here, and how would you tie that all together to make sure it's following the same principles? Does it even follow the same principles? I genuinely no idea, because I'm not an infrastructure person.
Gotcha. That's good feedback. And I think that's something we can take away there. Cool.
Yep.
Final call. Going once. Going twice.
And I
In
think
which
we got
case-
confirmation that we are perfect.
Exactly. It's always good to know that, isn't it?
It is.
Excellent.
Okay.
In which case, I think we can close out this evening's
ready to
call,
wrap up.
folks.
Yeah.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks all.
No worries. Well, thanks again, everyone, for another great meetup. And see you next month.
Thanks, folks.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Cheers. Bye bye.